The sun rose slowly over the dry, cracked earth of the village. Dust settled on everything, from the wooden huts with straw roofs to the bare feet of children chasing each other through the narrow paths between homes. It was another morning, like every other, in a place where time seemed to move more slowly than the rest of the world. This village, deep in the heart of one of the world's poorest countries, knew little of what life was like beyond its boundaries. For the families here, electricity was a distant concept, something only heard about through passing travelers or on the rare occasions when aid workers visited. Beds were not a necessity. Most slept on woven mats laid on hardened clay floors. And bicycles? They were a luxury so rare, they were spoken of with the same awe reserved for legends. But for the Johnson family, this life was simply reality. Ethan Johnson, a sturdy 13-year-old with sun-darkened skin and curious eyes, stepped out of the hut he shared with his mother, Rachel, and his younger sister, Grace. His father, Michael, had passed away 2 years earlier from a curable disease that might have been treated had there been a nearby clinic. Since then, the burden of the family had fallen on Rachel's shoulders. She was strong, both in spirit and body, and determined to give her children the best life she could in a place where having enough food for the day was already a success. Rachel rose before the sun each morning. With a worn basket in hand, she walked miles to fetch water from the nearest well. There were no faucets, no pipes, and certainly no warm showers. The water was heavy, the path treacherous, and yet she made the journey daily without complaint. Ethan, already used to the rhythms of their life, would tend to the small garden plot outside their hut. Tomatoes, cassava, and some greens provided the bulk of their meals. Rice and beans, when they could afford them from the market, were a treat. Grace, only 7, had never seen a television, didn't know what air conditioning felt like, and thought the occasional generator-powered radio at the market was magical. Yet despite this, her laughter was infectious. She would spend hours making toys from scraps. Plastic bottles became dolls, and sticks were transformed into tiny animals in her imagination. Their lives were hard, undeniably, but filled with a simplicity that had its own kind of beauty. School was a privilege that not everyone in the village had. The government school was nearly 10 miles away, and without transportation, children had to walk. Many families couldn't afford for their kids to be gone for so long each day when there was work to be done at home. But Rachel insisted that Ethan and Grace attend, even if it meant waking up earlier, walking in the cold or heat, or arriving late because of a sick goat or a broken shoe. She knew education was the only hope for something better. Ethan dreamed of bicycles. To him, a bicycle meant freedom. It meant being able to reach school faster, to help his mother more efficiently, and to carry water without bruising his back from the weight. He once saw a boy from another village ride past on a rusted, bent bicycle with mismatched tires. It was the most beautiful thing Ethan had ever seen. He told his mother about it for weeks afterward, fantasizing about the day he might have one of his own. Rachel would smile and nod, knowing their income couldn't stretch that far, but she never told him to stop dreaming. One afternoon, while walking back from school, Ethan noticed a group of people gathering under the large baobab tree that marked the village's center. Curious, he approached and found a man in a clean button-up shirt with rolled sleeves unloading boxes from a dusty pickup truck. The man, whose name was Daniel, was an American aid worker with a nonprofit that brought supplies to remote communities. He introduced himself to the villagers, shaking hands and speaking through a translator. His mission was simple: to learn what the community needed most and to offer what little support they could. Ethan listened intently as Rachel stepped forward and told Daniel about the lack of water, the long walks to school, and how many children dropped out because of the distance. Other parents spoke of sleeping on cold dirt floors, of losing children to illnesses they couldn't name, of never having enough food. Daniel wrote everything down. And then, just before he left, he promised to return with something useful. Weeks passed and life continued. The days were long, and the nights darker than ever. Without electricity, the stars were the only source of light. Grace was frightened of the dark sometimes, so Ethan would tell her stories until she drifted to sleep. Rachel kept working harder, stretching every meal, fixing worn clothes by candlelight. Then, one morning, the sound of an engine broke the stillness of the village. Dust billowed into the air as Daniel's pickup truck returned. This time, the bed of the truck wasn't filled with just boxes. It held several second-hand bicycles. Some were rusted, others had mismatched parts, but all were in working condition. Children ran toward the truck, eyes wide with excitement. Ethan couldn't believe what he was seeing. Daniel jumped out of the vehicle and greeted the villagers with a wide grin. He explained that his organization had partnered with a cycling group in the United States that donated used bikes to rural communities. And today, these bikes belonged to them. There weren't enough for every child, so the village elders decided to give them to families who had school-aged children living farthest from the school. Ethan stood in disbelief as his family's name was called. He looked at his mother, unsure if he heard correctly, and Rachel nodded with tears in her eyes. Together, they walked toward the truck, and Ethan was handed a scratched-up blue mountain bike with a slightly torn seat. To him, it might as well have been made of gold. He rode it for the first time that afternoon, wobbling and laughing as Grace clapped her hands. He couldn't wait to show his classmates, to carry Grace on the back when she was tired, to use it to help his mom transport water and vegetables. That bicycle wasn't just a means of transport, it was a key to opportunity, to safety, to something just a little better than before. Daniel stayed for a few more days, teaching some of the older boys how to maintain the bikes, patch tires, and fix chains. He left behind tools and spare parts and promised to return with more support. He also gave Rachel a solar-powered lantern, one of a handful he had brought. It was the first time their home had light after dark. That night, as they gathered around the small glow, reading an old donated book, Ethan looked around and realized something had changed. Their struggles remained, but hope had returned. Months passed, and Ethan's school performance improved. Without being tired from walking miles every day, he had more energy to learn. Grace was excited to go to school with her brother. Rachel was able to sell more vegetables because Ethan could carry more on the bike. And slowly, their lives began to shift. They still had no electricity, no proper beds, and their meals were modest at best. But they had found a way to move forward.